The Thesari arrived at the Council Armory Labs with audit drones, not diplomatic aids, and with legal writs carried like weapons. The chamber had been designed as neutral ground, a ring of transparent vaults where member species stored cultural and biological archives under sealed covenant. On ordinary days, the place sounded like low voices and machine hum. On inspection day, it sounded like metal claws on glass. High Commander Owen of the Thesari war clans crossed the central floor in dark ceremonial armor, flanked by two bio-oracles, whose cranial crests were veined with luminous interface filaments. The Thesari had built their power on predictive conquest. They mapped rivals by metabolism, lifespan, reproductive curves, and tolerance to trauma, then chose the hour of attack with mathematical cruelty. For 3 centuries, that doctrine had worked. Empires that resisted were shattered. Empires that submitted paid tribute and called it peace. Now they wanted genomes. For strategic ranking, Owen said to the council recorder, voice amplified across the vault like a verdict. Species that demand equal say in military deliberation must be measurable by military standards. Unknown biology is concealed intent. Concealed intent is hostility. No one in the chamber believed that framing, but council law had loopholes carved by frightened votes years earlier, when Thesari fleets had parked over 3 independent trade worlds and waited for signatures. The writ was valid. Resistance would trigger sanctions that most species could not absorb. The Valari delegates shifted on their perches in visible discomfort. The crystalline consortium emitted a low harmonic of protest and then fell silent when Owen's gaze settled on them. Humanity complied. That detail would be discussed for months afterward as either prudence or bait. Ambassador Elena Markovich authorized release of Earth's genomic archives with one condition. All scans would be witnessed, logged, and copied to council record in real time. Owen accepted, with an amused tilt of his jaw. Transparent to the end, he said, loud enough for every delegation. Admirable in children. Fatal in rivals. The bio-oracles worked in layered spectra, running protein expression models against deep evolutionary projections. They scanned avian spines, methane-adapted membrane colonies, and the crystal-encoded inheritance matrices of silicon lineages with practiced indifference. They found variations, oddities, survivability traits, nothing that threatened Thesari confidence. Then they reached the human file cluster. The first oracle froze for half a second, which for Thesari was a visible shock. The second reran the sweep with manual overrides, then called for contamination checks, then ordered independent substrate verification from the lab core. Markovich watched the sequence of commands with her hands folded behind her back, expression neutral, while council representatives leaned forward in involuntary unison. A lattice surfaced on the central display, nested through non-coding regions long dismissed by older species as biological clutter. It was not inert junk. It was a dormant architecture, self-editing regulatory chains that could reweight immune response, tissue repair priority, toxin filters, and neural signal routing under stress signatures. The lattice did not read as random potential. It read as design by selection pressure, so sustained and so multifactorial that the Thesari war models placed it 40,000 years ahead of baseline human development. The chamber remained quiet for 3 breaths. Then Owen laughed. It was not disbelief. It was contempt finding a stage. Forged blood, he said. A laboratory parlor trick stitched into primate tissue and presented as destiny. You expect this council to accept that Tool, using mammals, accidentally grew pre-adaptive warfare biology while negotiating shipping tariffs and arguing about border customs. One of the Aum seekers made a startled click. The sound died when Owen turned. He took 2 measured steps toward Markovich, claws ringing on the floor. "Hear me clearly, Ambassador. In Thessari doctrine, weakness lies. Strength conquers. Anomalies are erased before they mature into rivals. Earth's recent influence already strained tolerable balance. This fraud confirms hostile trajectory. We will not wait while a lesser species rehearses ascension with counterfeit genes." The council chair attempted intervention, citing procedural review. Owen ignored him and addressed the room as if it were already conquered. "The Thessari war clans hereby classify the human genomic anomaly as a strategic destabilizer. Preventive correction is authorized pending fleet vote, and fleet vote will not delay operational positioning. Any species harboring human bioassets will be considered complicit." The word preventive correction landed harder than shouted threats. Everyone in the chamber understood Thessari language for war. They never called invasions invasions. They called them hygiene. Markovich did not move until Owen finished. Then she stepped into the light cone of the recorder node and requested full session privilege. Permission granted. Her voice carried without strain. "For 2 centuries, humanity has been patient, transparent, and restrained in this council," she said. "The sequence your oracles found is real. It is ancient within our line. It is dormant under normal conditions. It is not a weapon in the sense your doctrine imagines, and it has never been used for coercion. But hear this with equal precision. Any forced activation attempt through invasion, seizure, or mass casualty pressure will be interpreted as species-level aggression." Owen's pupils narrowed to dark slits. Markovich continued, each clause paced like legal steel. "We hoped you would choose coexistence. If you choose coercion, the consequences will be yours." A Thessari aide leaned to Owen and transmitted on a private channel. Owen listened, then smiled with predatory satisfaction. He opened a fleet relay in open session and projected command telemetry to every witness. "War clan task groups already in transit," he announced. "Objective set. Seizure of 3 human frontier gene vault stations under emergency biological authority. Priority target Kiepri Junction. Secondary targets Holden Reach and Orison Spine. Execute immediately." He looked directly at Markovich as the command packet left his console. "Observe, Ambassador. This is how strength edits reality." The council chamber finally fractured into overlapping voices. Some delegates called for emergency injunction. Some demanded escorts for civilian lanes. Others, especially those who had survived Thessari enforcement campaigns, said nothing at all. They had seen this choreography before. Threat framed as procedure. Procedure backed by carriers. Carriers followed by occupation treaties. Only the human delegation remained unnervingly still. Markovich acknowledged receipt of the live war order, requested that the council archive preserve unredacted transmission, and then sat down as if the session had returned to routine trade disputes. Owen mistook that composure for defeat. So did most of the room. By the end of that cycle, 3 different council news nets had already published the same line. Humanity had been publicly humiliated, and the Thessari were about to prove that diplomacy had always been camouflage for fear. In Earth-Luna Joint Command, nobody used those words out loud. They did not need to. Admiral David Okafor watched the Armory Lab recording once, muted, while intelligence overlays crawled across the table in front of him. He was broad-shouldered, silver at the temples, and known for speaking less during crises, not more. The officer to his left, Intelligence Director Anna Kovac, had already tagged Owen's public transmission with 74 metadata anomalies, including 1 deliberate reveal. The Thessari believed the first strike could finish in 12 hours. Confidence window is narrow, Kovac said. They intend spectacle, not attrition. They want captured officers on stream before the second dawn. Okafor nodded. Then we deny the spectacle and give them mathematics. Across from him, Captain Imani Reyes of the carrier Resolute stood with her hands clasped behind her back, jaw tight but voice level. K-Puri pickets can yield 2 vectors and still close the corridor. Mines are cold and legal under prior defense notice. If they pursue aggressively, they enter the throat. Do they know the throat exists? Asked Defense Liaison Thomas Miller. They know the map, Reyes said. They do not know what we buried in the map. That distinction defined human planning during the previous 20 years. Publicly, Earth had built treaties, trade corridors, joint disaster fleets, and medical exchanges. Quietly, it had treated every frontier route as a chessboard that might one day turn hostile. Gravitic mines were only one layer. Sensor shadows, false thermal histories, inert decoy platforms, dormant relay keys, and emergency civilian extraction lanes formed a mesh prepared in peacetime and filed under infrastructure resilience. Most member species called that excessive. Human logistics called it Tuesday. Markovich entered the command room without ceremony, still in council formal wear, and accepted a fresh briefing slate before speaking. External contacts. Valerii requesting asylum corridors for their convoys if fighting spreads, Mueller said. Merchants of Pax offering emergency credit lines. 2 neutral blocks advise de-escalation language. No one is committing ships yet. They will, Okafor said, after first proof. Markovich met his eyes. You will have legal authorization for proportional defense in 20 minutes. I can get interdiction authority if Owen fires first on a recorded civilian channel. Reyes allowed herself a thin expression that almost resembled humor. Then we should make sure every civilian channel is recording. No one laughed, but tension eased by a degree. Human command culture discouraged theatrics, yet it tolerated dry irony when fear threatened focus. Outside the command glass, dozens of analysts moved in practiced cadence, feeding fleet packets, civilian advisories, and medical readiness alerts into one synchronized stream. Medical readiness was where the old secret lived. Commander Leah Srinivasan, Chief of Expeditionary Medicine, appeared as a secure inset on the main display. Genomic response teams are staged at all 3 targets, she reported. Protocols remain conditional. Activation thresholds require confirmed existential criteria and dual command authorization. We can improve survivability in trauma windows. We cannot turn people into myths. Okafor did not glance away from the tactical map. No myths needed. Just bring them home breathing. Srinivasan's expression sharpened. That has always been the objective. 3 days before Owen's declaration, her teams had run final drills in vacuum triage bays, practicing treatments that once sounded speculative and now sat inside locked medkits aboard marine cutters. The capability was formidable precisely because it was narrow. Not invulnerability, not engineered monsters, but faster clotting, toxin suppression, neural stabilization, and recovery time measured in minutes instead of hours when conditions justified the risk. It was a resilience framework, civilization deep, layered through training and ethics as much as biology. Markovich listened to the status reports, then set her council badge on the table beside the tactical display. He wanted humiliation live, she said quietly. He gave us evidence live instead. Every order, every threat, every ignored warning is now record. Kovac pulled up a secondary window filled with the Sarai command architecture. Their net is cleaner than most, but not clean enough. Pattern mirroring packages are in position. When they think they are watching retreat vectors, They will be watching the story they expected. Okafor finally stood. Around him, the room shifted from planning to execution posture. Transmit defense condition Amber to all frontier stations ready, he said. Civilian corridor priority 1. Kepri picket rotates on schedule, no heroics. Let them believe the first line is all we have. When they commit mass, close the corridor and light the throat. He paused long enough to let each station chief confirm. Humanity spent 2 centuries proving we could build with others, he said. If they insist on learning what we built for this day, we will teach once. At Kepri Junction, the first human escorts turned in disciplined silence toward assigned vectors, while far beyond the relay horizon, the Sari spear carriers accelerated into attack formation, certain they were about to discipline a species that mistook patience for weakness. The first Thesari missiles entered Kepri space with their transponders lit and their propaganda channel unmuted. They were not tactical shots. They were theater. 6 kinetic lances struck empty cargo pylons outside the junction ring, turning obsolete steel into a bright, expanding halo, while every public relay in 3 sectors carried the impact from 4 angles. A heartbeat later, High Commander Owen's image filled civilian bands reserved for distress coordination, his armored shoulders framed by clan banners and kill script etched into black alloy. Station Kepri, hear lawful correction, he said, voice edged with ritual certainty. Your species presented forged biology to gain political leverage, then threatened military response when questioned. You now stand under war clan biological injunction. Surrender gene vault authority, dock all armed hulls, and submit command personnel for verification custody. Compliance preserves your civilians. Defiance marks every deck, every suit, every pilot as sanctioned prey. On Kepri Control, Captain Imani Reyes watched the feed without blinking and keyed a full-spectrum response that included Council Legal, emergency civilian channels, and the Thesari command net itself. Her tone remained almost conversational, which made the words land harder. Hi, Commander Owen. This is Captain Reyes, authorized defense officer for Kepri Junction under Council Charter and bilateral frontier law. You are transmitting demands without jurisdiction and firing demonstration weapons on protected infrastructure. Withdraw your forces beyond designated security perimeter immediately. Any boarding action against Gene Vault personnel constitutes species-level aggression. This warning is now logged and witnessed. Owen answered at once, as if he had prepared for this exact cadence and had no use for it. You recite statutes because statutes are all that stand between your kind and natural order. You hide behind process the way burrowers hide behind dirt. I offer terms once. Yield your archives and kneel your officers, and I will permit your children to remember that humans once held this junction. Refuse, and your line becomes an instruction to others. Reyes let 2 seconds pass, long enough for her tactical chief to finish tagging hostile locks blooming across the scope. Then she spoke again, still level. Your terms are refused. Civilian lanes are opening now. If you continue, you will be treated as an invading force. Across the command pit, Lieutenant Armand Hale muttered, not quietly enough to be private. He really thinks threats are strategy. Reyes did not look at him. He thinks threats are proof. Give him room to prove himself wrong. On Owen's bridge, the exchange ended in contemptuous silence. He closed the public channel and turned to his vanguard coordinators, claws resting on the command rail like hooked blades. Observe, he said to the younger officers, many on their first prestige campaign. Humans confuse composure with leverage. They will stage a token defense, then petition for mediated surrender. We will board their vaults before second watch and stream their officers in restraint collars by dawn cycle. Sub-Commander Rek, who commanded the lead spear carrier cluster, inclined his head in formal assent. Projected resistance below 1/4 expected for peer species. Their escort tonnage is light. Because they are light, Owen said. Break their line cleanly. Do not waste munitions on theatrics now. The lesson comes after. 90 minutes after the Thessari crossed the relay horizon, Kypri's evacuation sirens cut from pulsed red to steady amber, signaling that civilian corridor convoys had reached minimum safe distance. That was the only sound on Reyes's bridge that suggested urgency. The human picket line was already moving, escort frigates sliding backward in disciplined vectors that looked, to hostile sensors, like reluctant retreat. The Thessari lances reached for them and met near misses by centimeters, then meters, then empty coordinates as if human helms had started reading thought. In Earth-Luna Joint Command, Okafor watched the opening maneuvers through a stripped tactical skin, all ornament removed. White icons for friendly hulls, red for hostile, amber for uncertainties. Kovac stood beside him, with 2 analysts feeding live deception health metrics into her slate. Pattern mirroring ghosts are holding, she said. Their command displays are overweighting our rearward drift and underweighting lateral silence corridors. REC is chasing confidence gradients, not ships. Good, Okafor said. Reyes stays inside doctrine. Markovich patched in from council emergency chambers where delegates argued over sanctions nobody could enforce in time, listened to both channels, and then inserted one sentence for record. Council injunction request denied by procedural delay. Defense legitimacy remains intact. You are clear. Okafor gave a brief nod to no one in particular. Then, we stop asking. At Kypri, the first real exchange came fast and ugly. A Thessari lance clipped the destroyer Nadia along its dorsal spine, sending half the sensor mast into vacuum and dropping primary comms on decks 3 through 5. Marines in Transfer Lock C took the blast through bulkhead resonance. 2 went down with internal trauma before the deck medic reached them. 6 minutes later, both were conscious again, breathing hard, eyes focused, clotting profiles stabilized under Srinivasan's conditional protocol. The Thessari had a clear view of that recovery through a hacked camera feed they thought was still secure. On REC's command screen, human casualties were supposed to translate into hesitation. Instead, wounded signatures disappeared from combat inefficiency tables and reappeared tagged combat capable. A Thessari triage officer checked for data corruption, then checked again with manual diagnostics. Sub-commander, she said, voice tightening despite discipline. Their medical turnaround exceeds modeled mammalian limits by a wide margin. Casualty persistence is not behaving. REC flattened his crest in annoyance. Nothing supernatural is happening. They are cycling reserve crews. They are not, she said. Biometrics match the same individuals. REC cut the feed. Then mark them stubborn and continue. He ordered full pursuit into what his displays labeled a collapsing human corridor, the exact shape he had drilled against for years. Weaker force yields center, stronger force fractures flanks. War ends quickly. His spear carriers accelerated, escorts widening for envelopment, clan pennants bright against tactical black. That was when the corridor spoke. Human gravitic minds did not explode in fire. They rewrote momentum. The first Thessari cruiser entering the throat did not break apart. It lurched sideways as if seized by an invisible giant, slammed into its own escort arc, and folded both formations into rotational chaos. 2 more mines triggered offset pulses that stretched formation spacing into impossible geometry, opening clean shooting lanes for human rail platforms hidden as dead infrastructure nodes. Reyes heard the mine confirmations in clipped sequence. Throat 1 active. Throat 3 active. Rail nests green. She gave one order. Hold count. No celebration. The rails fired. At standoff range, tungsten spears crossed vacuum faster than panic, punching through spear carrier armor seams the Sari doctrine had never expected to expose. 3 escorts spun dark. A 4th vented atmosphere and drifted out of command cohesion. Human destroyers appeared on Rex's left flank, where his map insisted there was nothing but thermal debris, their signatures blooming from sensor shadow like knives drawn from cloth. On Owen's bridge, confidence did not vanish at once. It tightened. "Localized trap," he said, too calm, as if naming the event diminished it. "Commit second reserve. Crush the pocket. I want their line snapped before fear propagates." An older clan tactician, scarred across both mandibles from campaigns predating Owen's command, looked up from the feed and chose dangerous honesty. "Hi, Commander. This is not pocket resistance. Their retreat vectors were curated. We are inside their prepared battle space." Owen's gaze became glacial. "Prepared by prey." "Prepared by professionals," the tactician said. For one suspended beat, the bridge held the kind of silence that ended careers. Owen turned away before anyone knew whether restraint or necessity had won. "Signal all carriers," he said. "No doctrinal drift. We proceed to seize your timetable. I want Kipri boarded and their ambassador on her knees before council recess." At Kipri, Reyes caught that transmission fragment through Kovach's ghosted intercept and allowed herself a single dry breath that could have been laughter in a kinder hour. "He scheduled the victory speech," she said. "That saves us planning." Lieutenant Hale grinned despite himself, then stiffened as new red icons entered the outer envelope. "Mom, additional heavy hulls. They are still coming." "Of course they are," Reyes said. "If arrogance retreated on first contact, history would be short." By the time the second combat watch began, wreckage from both fleets marked the corridor like charcoal strokes across a star chart, and every neutral observer in range had stopped calling the engagement a raid. In Joint Command, casualty boards updated, then updated again, and Srinivasan's medical stream stayed brutally busy. Human losses were real, painful and unacceptable in the way losses always were, but the recovery curve was rewriting operational endurance in real time. Marines who should have been out of the fight for hours were returning in 20 minutes. Boarding teams with toxin exposure were stabilizing before secondary complications could cascade. The Sari analysts, watching stolen snippets, started flagging the same word in internal chatter: anomaly. Kovach pushed a tight bundle of intercepts to Okafor. "Command net strain is climbing. Our ghosts are breeding confusion at the clan hierarchy layer. They think they are receiving sacred priority orders from bloodlines that did not transmit." "Can we hold it?" Okafor asked. "For now," she said. "But once Owen realizes he's being narrated, he will burn half his channels to regain certainty." Okafor studied the map, then opened Fleet Command. His voice carried to Kipri, Halden Reach, Orison Spine, and the reserve groups that had waited 20 years inside black-budget silence. "All stations, this is Admiral Okafor. The Thesari have crossed from coercion to active seizure operations under recorded warning. Defense condition advances to Crimson. Execute phase line helix on my mark. Repeat, phase line helix." Reyes heard the words and felt the bridge shift around her, fear and relief and fierce concentration finding a new shape. She keyed acknowledgement. "Kipri copies helix. Corridor remains contested. We are holding." Okafor's final transmission to frontline command was short enough to memorize. "We gave warning in law, in public, and in good faith. They chose force. Respond with discipline. End this in a way the Council cannot misread." Beyond Kipri's shattered pylons, dark human signatures long catalogued as logistics hulls began to wake. turning toward battle with weapon arrays unfolding from civilian silhouettes, while deep inside Thesari command architecture, ghost patterns opened one more door and left it unlocked. Sub-Commander Rek found the unlocked door 3 seconds later and mistook it for a gift from his ancestors. On his command display, a human destroyer screen near Kipri's inner spindle peeled away in what looked like panic, leaving a seam in the defense web wide enough for a spear carrier thrust. The telemetry carried authenticated confidence markers, projected fuel limits, and a stagger rhythm that matched every human withdrawal pattern his academy had ever taught him to exploit. He did not know that Anna Kovach's team had written those markers 8 months earlier, folded them into captured Thesari training archives, and waited for this exact appetite. Vector break confirmed, Rek announced. Enemy cohesion degrading on Axis 12. Spear Group Cobalt with me. We split their center now. 5 heavy hulls turned as one. Their escorts followed. Their long-range lances charged for a killing run into empty space. Captain Reyes watched the move unfold through the filtered skin on Kipri control and spoke without raising her voice. Ghost lure complete. Open shutters. The dead logistics platforms around Kipri's cargo belt unsealed armored petals that had spent 19 years disguised as radiation shielding. Inside waited compact rail cannons and missile stacks painted in civilian hazard colors. Human destroyers, cold and dark until that moment, lit drives from the belt's blind side and rose through iron-rich debris with signatures masked by ore bloom. Lieutenant Hale stared at the sudden swarm of friendly icons and shook his head once, almost admiring the cruelty of its timing. They turned our freight yard into a gun line. Freight wins wars, Reyes said. Fire by doctrine, Table Gamma. Keep lanes clear for medevac. The first salvos did not seek spectacle. They sought control. Rails snapped through Thesari escort screens at oblique angles, knocking command nodes out of sequence and leaving armored prows intact but blind. Missiles carried decoy clusters that bloomed into hundreds of false targets, forcing Thesari point defense to spend itself on glitter, while real penetrators drove into sensor dishes and comm spines. Rek's spear group entered the seam and discovered it had no floor. His tactical feed, still weighted by ghost mirrors, showed 2 human destroyers dead ahead and no threats to port. In real space, 6 destroyers crossed his flank at knife range and launched breaching flechettes tuned for weapon mounts. Cobalt 2 lost its forward lance. Cobalt 4 lost half its guidance array. Cobalt 1, Rek's own hull, took a strike that welded turret bearings in place. "Why are they inside our envelope?" a junior officer asked, voice cracking through discipline. Rek did not answer him. He hammered commands into his console, forcing manual refreshes, swapping overlays, stripping prediction modules out one by one until raw returns flooded in ugly and late. By then, the seam had become a bowl, and the bowl had become a trap. On Owen's flagship, the command pit began receiving sacred priority packets from 3 bloodlines that had not held operational precedence in 2 generations. 1 ordered total pursuit. 1 ordered capture protocols only. 1 ordered immediate withdrawal to preserve clan continuity. All 3 carried valid seals. The older tactician, Sirat, placed both claws on the rail and leaned into the console glow. "Hi, Commander. Hierarchy integrity is compromised. Seal collision at the bloodline layer. Someone has touched our inheritance channels." Owen's head snapped toward him. "No species touches the Thesari blood channels." "Then our ancestors have developed a sense of humor," Sirat said, and even in crisis the dry contempt landed like steel on stone. "Either way, captains are receiving mutually sacred orders. Cohesion is fraying in real time." As if to prove the point, 2 escort clusters on the outer arc broke opposite directions while broadcasting identical compliance acknowledgments. Owen opened a command-wide channel and let his voice strike every bridge in his fleet. All clans hear me. Disregard all priority traffic except direct flagship relay. Any captain citing lineage packet over combat command will be stripped and cored. You are warriors, not archivists. For 12 seconds, obedience returned. Then Kovach's second ghost cascade hit. At Earth-Luna Joint Command, she did not smile. The operation demanded too much blood to celebrate mechanics. Cascade 2 injected. They can still shoot, but they cannot trust which voice is holy. Okafor watched the red icon stumble, reform, stumble again. Keep pressure. Do not overplay. At Kipri, another shock unfolded where everyone could see it. Marine cutter Aster breached a disabled Thesari escort to secure prisoners and clear reactor risk. The boarding team met a countercharge in close corridor fighting, took 2 severe injuries in the opening exchange, and pulled back to the docking collar under suppressive fire. Normally, that was where a unit reset for an hour. Under Srinivasan's conditional protocol, medics sealed ruptured tissue, stabilized neural shock, and pushed both Marines through accelerated recovery cycles while the cutter still clung to the enemy hull. 8 minutes later, helmet cams showed the same 2 soldiers rejoining the stack with steady hands and clear callouts, moving with disciplined aggression instead of medicated haze. A Thesari observer drone captured the sequence and relayed it upchain before human cyber teams burned the feed. Surat watched that clip beside Owen and exhaled through his teeth. The oracles were correct. Not forged blood. Prepared blood. Owen kept his gaze on the tactical glass. They are still flesh. They are flesh that recovers faster than our doctrine allows, Surat replied. Doctrine is not sacred if data kills us. Across the flagship, pride and fear wrestled in silent postures. Young officers who had expected a punitive raid now handled casualty streams that refused to settle into familiar patterns. Wounded humans kept returning. Human holes appeared where projections said none could exist. The Thesari targeting solutions decayed as sensor ghosts multiplied. None of it looked like brute superiority. It looked like a species that had anticipated this precise shape of arrogance and engineered the battlefield years in advance. By the second hour of the Kipri engagement, neutral council monitors stopped describing events as a border seizure and began labeling them as a failed incursion under contested command integrity. That phrasing reached Owen through a legal intercept with all the warmth of poison. He opened a narrow band to Reyes, not as negotiation but as performance, and projected his image into Kipri control in full armor, crest lifted in ritual contempt. Human captain, you hide behind traps and counterfeit authority because you cannot face rightful combat. You poison channels, mask weapons as cargo, and return maimed soldiers to battle like wind-up constructs. Do not mistake temporary confusion for strength. The Thesari judgment is not delayed by tricks. Stand your ships in open vector, or keep burrowing in stolen tunnels while your council allies watch what you truly are. Reyes answered on the same channel, broad enough for every witness in 3 sectors. Hi, Commander. We warned you in open session, in legal form, and on civilian bands. You chose invasion. You fired first. You targeted protected infrastructure and declared our personnel prey. We are defending our stations, evacuating civilians, and disabling your fleet with minimum irreversible loss where possible. If you want open vector, withdraw your ships beyond the perimeter and face tribunal in a chamber instead of a corridor. Owen cut the channel. The bridge felt colder afterward. Surat spoke carefully, each word chosen for survival. Heard across the sector, that exchange favored them. It favored whoever survives, Owen said. He ordered a concentrated lance strike on Kipri's inner command spindle to break human coordination. The strike group formed, accelerated, and then peeled apart when two captains received contradictory sacred directives mid-burn. One followed flagship command. One followed bloodline seal. Their prows crossed paths and collided hard enough to send both ships tumbling out of lane discipline. Human rails harvested the gap. The tide shifted then, not into full collapse, but into visible doubt. Wreck, still fighting to extract Cobalt Group from the bowl, requested reinforcement twice and received 3 different acknowledgments with 3 different vectors. He chose none, burned emergency thrust, and dragged his damaged spear carrier through a debris cloud while human destroyers carved his escort ring into fragments. He saved 2 of 5 heavy hulls and hated himself for feeling grateful. When he finally re-established a stable line to the flagship, his voice had gone flat. Cobalt Group combat ineffective. Request regroup coordinates. Current theater no longer supports seizure timetable. Owen stared at the map and did not answer immediately. What he saw was not defeat yet. It was worse for Thessari pride. It was parity achieved by a species he had called primitive, then leveraged into local superiority through patience, preparation, and disciplined refusal to panic. If he retreated now, every clan rival in the Empire would use Khepri as evidence that his doctrine had gone brittle. If he pressed blindly, he risked feeding ships into a grinder designed by people he still did not fully understand. He chose a middle path that sounded like command and felt like concession. All groups disengage from deep throat vectors, he ordered. Form outer cordon at Mark Vesta approaches. We will recompile hierarchy, purge channel contamination, and re-engage under centralized blood authority. This junction is not abandoned. It is deferred. On Khepri control, Hale looked up from intercept and let out a breath he had been holding since first contact. They are backing off the vault axis. Reyes kept her eyes on the board. They are repositioning, not quitting. Track every burn. Civilian corridors stay open. Rescue first, chase second. A transmission light pulsed at her station. Ambassador Markovich from Council Emergency Chamber. Audio only through line degradation. Captain Council has archived unredacted evidence of forced seizure attempt, civilian channel abuse, and War Clan command fractures under active aggression. Several neutral blocks are moving from observation to formal censure. Reyes keyed back, still scanning the map. Understood, Ambassador. Tell them censure is appreciated and tardy. A brief pause. Then Markovich's answer carried the dry edge of someone who had spent 2 days listening to procedural cowardice dressed as prudence. I will select gentler nouns. In the battered dark beyond Khepri's ring, human cutters moved from kill lanes into recovery lanes, towing crippled hulls clear of mine shadows, marking surrender beacons, and pulling survivors from pressure leaks regardless of species. The sorry crews who had expected execution found themselves disarmed, triaged, and tagged for transfer under council oversight. That mercy did not erase what had happened. It clarified it. Aboard Owen's flagship, the first consolidated casualty report arrived with numbers no Thessari campaign planner had modeled for a punitive raid. Surratt read them once and placed the slate face down. They are choosing not to finish us here, he said quietly. Owen's jaw tightened. They cannot. Surratt met his gaze. High Commander, they can. They are choosing sequence over spectacle. The words hung between them, like a verdict not yet spoken. Owen turned back to the tactical glass where Khepri still glowed with contested markers and slowly stabilizing human control bands. Behind his reflection, officers moved with forced precision, purging channels, reissuing authentication trees, and preparing to regroup at Vesta approaches, where doctrine still promised that mass and ferocity could restore order. He gave the next command in a voice scrubbed of anger. Transmit to all surviving war clan carriers. Rally at Vesta Gate. No independent heroics. No lineage disputes. We fight one battle there, under one will, and we break them in open collision, where tricks have nowhere to hide. No one on his bridge believed that last sentence completely. Everyone obeyed anyway. Everyone obeyed anyway, and the obedience sounded brittle over the fleet net. Owen watched his surviving carrier groups pull out of Kepri's mine shadow lanes in scarred arcs, each burn vector disciplined now, each acknowledgement clipped to pure protocol. The tactical glass no longer promised swift correction. It showed attrition, uncertainty, and human ships refusing to behave like prey. He could still win at Vesta if mass held, if bloodline command stayed coherent, if fear did not spread faster than orders. Thessari history had endured worse reversals. That was what he told his bridge. It was what he told himself. Surratt did not challenge him in front of the younger officers. He studied fresh intercepts instead, crest flattened as he read casualty recovery anomalies and logistics projections that made no sense under normal campaign math. Human combat endurance was rising as the battle lengthened. Their units were not simply surviving, they were cycling faster, reconstituting faster, and returning to action with unnerving discipline. The Thessari doctrine had modeled bravery. It had not modeled this tempo. On Kepri Control, Reyes tracked the withdrawal without chasing it. Her display filled with amber tags for damaged hulls, civilian tow requests, surrender beacons, and medevac corridors that still needed escort. She could have ordered pursuit into open space and bled Owen harder. She did not. The priority board in front of her listed rescue, stabilization, and transfer in that order, and every captain under her command had memorized the same hierarchy long before the first missile crossed the border. "Status on captured escorts," she asked. Lieutenant Hale pulled the feed from boarding command. "4 secured, 2 more in contest. Reactor teams report stable. The Thessari access trees are still fighting us, but Accord teams are inside all command spines." Reyes looked up. "Inside as observers or owners?" "Owners, Captain," Hale said, and then let a trace of astonishment into his tone. "Their own gunnery arrays are accepting human override chains." That was the third reveal, and it landed hard across the sector. The Helix Accord Reserve had not arrived only as extra hull mass. It had arrived with adaptive boarding cadres trained for one narrow, ruthless task: seize control architecture intact, rewrite authorization hierarchies in minutes, and turn captured tonnage into denial platforms before enemy command understood what had been lost. The Thessari ships had been engineered around bloodline keys and ritual redundancies meant to prevent mutiny. Human teams had spent years learning how those redundancies failed under stress, then designed bio-locked translators that did not break the system so much as outrank them. On the disabled spear carrier Verath, Chief Warrant Officer Mikhail Sato stood in a smoke-thin command pit, while his techs worked 3 consoles at once. Thessari glyph streams cascaded red and gold, rejecting intrusions, demanding lineage proofs, invoking ancestral privileges no human could ever provide. Sato inserted a RIS key, fed in live biometric signatures from the surrendered bridge officers now under guard, and let the translator build a temporary legal fiction the Thessari machine logic could not distinguish from sacrament. "Override stack green," his specialist said. "Weapons in standby. Drive authority transferred." Sato exhaled once. "Broadcast surrender beacon and mark civilian lanes protected, then slave their point defense to keep corridor control." A Thessari prisoner captain, wrists bound but posture still proud, stared at the human icon blooming on his own command table. "You profane blood command," he said. Sato answered without heat. "No, we replace it with accountability." By the next rotation around Kepri's dim primary, 9 Thesari warships were no longer firing on human lanes because human crews were flying them under Council witness tags. That was when alien worry became alien fear. Neutral monitors had tolerated one human deception layer as cleverness. They had tolerated accelerated medical recovery as anomaly. Captured enemy capital craft turning into compliant peacekeeping hulls inside 6 hours was something else entirely. It implied a species that had prepared for every branch of escalation and built operational ethics into each branch. Human command did not need annihilation to win. It needed control, timing, and documentation. In the council emergency chamber, Markovich stood at her lectern while delegates argued over language that no longer mattered to the front. She waited for silence, received a fraction of it, and spoke into the recorder field. You are witnessing active proof that restraint and capability are not opposites, she said. Human forces have seized hostile ships without atmospheric venting, preserved surrendering crews, and kept civilian corridors open under fire. We request immediate authorization for neutral inspection teams at Kepri, Halden Reach, and Orison Spine. If you still doubt who crossed the legal line, inspect the line where it was crossed. A Valari representative rose on narrow legs, feathers trembling, and this time did not sit back down under Thesari glare. The Valeri convoys at Corridor Blue were granted passage by human escort during first strikes. We confirm that record. We offer sensor observers and medevac pilots under Council colors, effective now. The crystalline consortium followed with a resonant chord translated as formal commitment. We contribute long-band lattice telemetry to Human Defense Command and to Public Archive simultaneously. No party may later claim confusion. Merchants of PAX transmitted next, practical as ever. Emergency credit lines convert to fuel and replacement mass delivered in theater. Payment deferred. Survival first. The chamber shifted from frightened spectatorship to late alignment, and everybody in that room knew why. Humans had done the one thing the galaxy rarely managed under pressure. They had made power legible. At Earth-Luna Joint Command, Okafor absorbed the new commitments and then turned back to the warboard, where Vestigate burned brighter with incoming signatures every minute. Owen was concentrating everything that still obeyed him into a frontal doctrine charge, exactly as predicted, once Clan Pride got wounded in public. The projection cones were ugly. If the Sari mass hit the gate in one coherent collision, casualties on every side would spike. If coherence failed at the wrong second, Owen's force would implode into its own momentum. Kovac placed a fresh intelligence slate beside him. He is purging channels and narrowing command authority to direct flagship relay. We can still degrade confidence, but not with broad-spectrum ghosts. He learned. Okafor nodded. Then we change questions. We do not need his fleet blind. We need it making mutually exclusive choices at decisive range. Srinivasan joined by secure feed from a forward triage ship. Face drawn. Voice firm. Medical update. Protocol activations remain within ethical thresholds. Recovery gains are holding, but cumulative stress is rising among frontline Marines. They can return quickly. They are not machines. Understood, Okafor said. She held his gaze through the screen. I need rotation discipline enforced from command level. If captains start believing resilience means inexhaustible, we pay later in names. You have my order, he said. No hero myths, no burn-through. That discipline was part of why humans were formidable, and it looked unglamorous from the outside. They fought as if every person mattered and every system could fail. They planned for rescue while planning for victory. They documented their own decisions before anyone could accuse them of convenient memory. They carried old debts like sacred obligations. They did not forget the species that had sheltered their refugees generations earlier, or the species that had traded medicine during Earth's plague years, or the species that had looked away when Thesari carriers parked over weak worlds and called it normal. Reyes finally left Kepri Control after 32 hours awake and transferred to the carrier Resolute, in transit to Vesta. She walked through a hangar crowded with Marines rearming beside medics, engineers patching armor around fresh weld scars, and Thesari prisoners receiving water packs from the same hands that had disarmed them. No one celebrated. No one pretended this phase was over. Work replaced adrenaline, and work kept fear useful. Captain's briefing assembled in the combat information room on low light. Hale, Sato, medical liaison officers, and 2 Allied observers under Council flag stood around a projected map of Vesta approaches. Reyes looked at each face before speaking. "We are not going to Vesta for revenge," she said. "We are going because Owen has chosen collision over withdrawal, and because every civilian route behind us stays at risk until his fleet is disarmed. Remember what he transmitted on open channels. Remember what we warned in open channels. We are not improvising anger. We are enforcing the boundary he crossed." One Allied observer, a Valari pilot with clipped wing feathers from old shrapnel, asked the question others were thinking. "Why keep rescuing Thesari crews while they regroup to kill you again?" Reyes answered in the same calm tone she had used under missile lock. "Because if we stop distinguishing between combatants and everyone else, then he has already rewritten us. We fight to end cycles, not inherit them." The room held that line in silence. Then Hale cleared his throat and brought up the Vesta tactical model. 3-ring construct is feasible if rail platforms reach mark by 0 hour. Outer ring decoys draw carrier lances off vector. Middle ring shears escorts. Inner ring cutter teams jump shadow side for reactor disables. Cyber cells inject bloodline seal conflicts at impact -9 seconds. Reyes looked to the Allied observers. "Your governments can still withdraw from this operation." The Valari pilot lifted his head. "We asked humans for corridor shelter and received it under fire. We stay." At the same hour, Owen addressed his reformed War Clan command from the flagship bridge. Every light dimmed except the tactical projection and the ritual braziers that marked clan authority. "Warriors of Thesari," he began, voice carrying the old cadence that had launched empires, "you have endured sabotage, deception, and sacrilege against our blood channels. You have witnessed prey species hiding behind traps and legal theater while claiming virtue. Hear me now. We will strip away their contrivances at Vesta Gate and impose the one law that precedes parchment. Strength decides. Their anomalies bleed. Their ships burn. Their confidence is borrowed and brief. At Vesta, we close with mass and claw. We shatter their center, and we remind this council why hierarchy exists." Many captains answered with formal assent. Some did so a beat late. Surratt watched those delays and knew what they meant. Thesari fear did not look like panic. It looked like perfect posture over fraying trust. The turning point began before the first Vesta shot, in numbers rather than flame. Human logistics packets from Earth, Mars, Luna, and frontier yards arrived in synchronized waves that made neutral analysts recalculate the entire species. Ships previously tagged as civilian support unfolded armor sleeves and point defense lattices while retaining medevac bays and tow rigs. Allied telemetry from crystalline arrays stitched dead zones into full-spectrum clarity. PAX fuel tenders ran hot through contested lanes under mixed escort and never missed a delivery window. Valari pilots flew casualty extractions through debris fields with human marines standing door guns beside them, species that had been peripheral in council hierarchy, now moving like one stitched command organism. At Vesta Gate itself, The geography favored whoever could choreograph chaos. A gravity shear plane cut the battle space into deceptive depth layers, and old mining scaffolds drifted in an arc that blocked long sightlines. Perfect terrain for Owen's doctrine if he could force direct collision. Better terrain for Okafor if he could make doctrine chase decoys into kill geometry. By the time Vesta's local star set behind the gate's fractured station ring, both fleets had arrived in full. Owen's carriers formed spearhead mass in the center, with escorts braided tight, banners lit, lances charged, every remaining clan committing to one overwhelming thrust. Human formations looked thinner at first glance, almost cautious. Destroyer screens spread wide around seemingly vulnerable cores. Then, reserve signatures began appearing at the edge of range, one cluster after another, not rushing, simply taking assigned coordinates until the tactical board stopped looking like a line and started looking like architecture. On the Resolute, Reyes watched that architecture lock into place and opened command net to all human and allied units. Final check. Civilian corridors green. Surrender channels open. Reactor disable packages armed. We hold fire until they cross mark line. Okafor's voice followed across the fleet, measured and unmistakable. For 2 centuries, we have been patient, transparent, and restrained. We asked for coexistence and offered proof in law. They answered with seizure orders and open threats. At Vestigate, we end their capacity to make that choice again. Fight disciplined. Protect each other. Leave no doubt in record or result. Across the void, Owen raised his ritual blade before the bridge glass and gave the order he had built his career to give. Advance. Full collision doctrine. Break them. Thousands of drives flared at once, and Vestigate turned white with converging vectors as the final confrontation began. The first Thessery wave crossed the Vesta mark line in a wedge so dense it looked solid. Carriers packed prow to stern behind armored escorts, lance capacitors glowing white along their spines. Owen had built the formation for one purpose: impact through fear, speed and weight before human adaptation could fold the field around him again. For 11 seconds, the charge held perfect discipline. Then the outer ring moved. Human decoy groups did not run. They advanced on oblique vectors, broadcasting fat signatures and staged command traffic that looked like overextended carriers trying to mask panic. The Sari lances snapped toward the bait exactly as planned, slewing the spearheads left and right prongs off Owen's ideal collision axis. At once, the gravity shear plane split those prongs into separate depth layers, and ships that had launched together found themselves fighting different battles with different sightlines and different clocks. On the Resolute, Reyes tracked the distortion bloom and spoke into fleet command without inflection. Outer ring draw confirmed. Middle ring, execute standoff shears. Inner ring hold shadows until Mark 7. Acknowledgements came from humans and allies in the same clipped cadence. Valari medevac pilots dropped lower along the mining scaffolds with running lights dark, waiting for lanes to open. Crystalline telemetry stitched the depth layer echoes into clean vectors and fed them to every allied bridge in less than a second. PAX tenders, absurdly calm inside a war zone, maintained fuel and rescue stations behind the middle ring as if they were servicing a rough shipping quarter rather than the largest fleet clash in Council history. The middle ring fired. Rail platforms hidden in old Vesta infrastructure opened with synchronized kinetic volleys that cut through escort knots at standoff range. No grand beams, no spectacle. Metal, velocity, geometry. The Sari screens buckled where the salvos hit. Armor punched inward around comm spines and maneuver clusters, leaving heavy hulls alive but half deaf. Human destroyers used those gaps with predatory precision, crossing perpendicular to the charge and stripping point defense arrays, off carrier flanks before rolling back into scaffold shadow. Owen felt the first true fracture when Clandriv Kesh reported sacred compliance and then fired on a target his flagship had never designated. Two more captains transmitted contradictory confirmations in the same breath, each citing bloodline priority seals that should not have existed outside ritual archive. He slammed a claw into the command rail. Flagship authority absolute. Purge all inherited packet trees. Direct relay only. Sirat did not look up from his console. They timed the seal collision to kinetic onset. Captains are choosing between theology and survival. Then they choose survival, Owen said. Some are choosing ancestry, Sirat replied. At Earth-Luna Joint Command, Kovac watched the bloodline spoof cascade hit the Thesari hierarchy in real time and gave Okafor a short nod. Injection landed. Mutually sacred orders are propagating through 13 carrier groups. Okafor's eyes stayed on Vesta. No widening. Keep it surgical. We promised enforcement, not extermination. By the 9th minute of the engagement, the Thesari wedge had become 3 wounded clusters, fighting separate tactical realities, while still believing they were one charge. Reyes gave the next order. Inner ring. Jump. Marine cutters flashed from folded positions inside debris shadow and micro-jumped directly into carrier blind cones, so close that Thesari lances could not depress to hit them without burning their own armor skirts. Boarding pods hit hull seams in disciplined pairs. Non-nuclear penetrators drove into reactor regulation chambers, flooding control systems with hard shutdown commands and forcing emergency scram cycles before self-destruct protocols could engage. One by one, carrier signatures dropped from attack status to dead drift, not destroyed, just disarmed. Inside Cutter Aster, the deck bucked as return fire scraped the outer hull. 2 Marines went down under concussive shock at the breach collar. Medic teams were already moving. Srinivasan's conditional protocol triggered under dual authorization, stabilizing neural overload, sealing vascular tears, dragging both soldiers back from the edge of operational loss. 4 minutes later, they were upright, helmets sealed, rejoining the stack as if the corridor had not tried to end them. A Thesari squad leader saw them return and hesitated long enough for Aster's team to clear his position and lock the compartment with minimal casualties on either side. Word spread faster than official reports. Human units did not break at expected thresholds. They absorbed damage, recalibrated, and came back organized. On open council relays, observers watched the Thesari ships go dark without catastrophic detonations and realized what that meant. Humanity could have taken the brutal route. It kept choosing control. Owen refused the implication. He ordered a full center burn, trying to force his remaining carriers through the human architecture before the disarms could cascade. The move almost worked. 3 heavy hulls punched through middle ring fire and reached kill range on a human command cluster near the gate's fractured station ring. Then, the Helix Reserve sprung the final hinge. 9 captured Thesari warships, now under human override chains and council witness tags, rose from behind the mining arc and lit their clan transponders in perfect fidelity. For a fatal instant, Owen's surviving captains read them as reinforcement. The captured ships rotated broadside and fired precision suppression patterns into Thesari point defense envelopes, blinding launch tubes and pinning maneuver options without targeting life support blocks. The betrayal by their own silhouettes tore the last seam in clan confidence. Sirat looked at the board, then at Owen. "Hi, Commander. Command integrity is gone. We can still save crews. Order surrender beacons." Owen's crest flared with cold fury. "I will not submit the Sari law to primates with stolen keys." "Then you will submit the Sari corpses to vacuum statistics," Sirat said. "This is finished." Across the field, Okafor opened a direct line to the Thesari flagship. He did not raise his voice. For 2 centuries, we have been patient, transparent, and restrained. We warned you in public, in law, and on civilian channels. You answered with seizure orders and declared our people prey. Your fleet is surrounded, your hierarchy is compromised, and your lanes are cut. Power down now. Transmit surrender codes, and we will preserve your crews under council supervision. Continue, and we will remove your capacity by force. Owen answered with silence for 3 breaths, then launched one last concentrated volley toward Vesta Gate. Human interceptors took the salvo apart before it reached the station ring. Middle ring rails replied with measured brutality, shearing the flagship escort wall open from bow to stern. Inner ring cutters exploited the gap and drove reactor-disabling penetrators into Owen's carrier shadows. The flagship lurched, drives coughing into dark. Tactical glass across 3 sectors marked it dead in space. 22 minutes after Owen gave the order to break them, the Thesari fleet at Vesta was combat ineffective. What followed was not a rout. It was dismantling. Human and allied units flooded the battle space with surrender channels in 7 trade languages and 2 Thesari ritual dialects. Ships that powered down were tagged, stabilized, and boarded under strict custody protocols. Ships that kept firing lost weapons, then drives, then command decks in that order. Valeri pilots ran extraction lanes through wreckage, so dense their wingtips brushed frozen metal. Pax tenders docked with both human and Thesari hulls under white-lit medical flags. Crystalline monitors mirrored every action to public archive. On the Resolute, Rhea saw one icon still burning hostile in the center of the drift field. Owen's flagship, atmosphere bleeding through multiple breaches, internal security guns still active around the bridge spine. She keyed her sidearm mag, checked seal pressure, and turned to Hale. "You have command until I return." Hale's jaw tightened. "Captain, send another team." "I am sending another team. I am on it." Sato joined the breach stack with 6 Marines and 2 medics. They crossed in a cutter that trembled under residual debris strikes, latched to the flagship's dorsal lock, and burned through in 40 seconds of blinding sparks and compressed silence. The interior smelled of hot metal and leaking coolant. Emergency strips threw red light over ritual carvings that had survived centuries of Thesari campaigns and now shook under each distant impact. Resistance came in disciplined bursts from clan guards who still believed the bridge could be retaken if they delayed long enough. Reyes pushed forward with controlled fire and stun charges where possible, lethal shots only when angles left no alternative. Her Marines moved as drilled: clear, anchor, call, advance. At the second pressure door, one of her point officers took a glancing strike through shoulder plating and dropped hard. Medic gel sealed the puncture, protocol stabilized him, and he waved off extraction before the door even finished cycling open. The team kept momentum. They breached Owen's bridge on manual override. The command dais had shattered across the deck, one projection column still flickering with broken clan banners and surrender beacons replacing them in relentless sequence. Atmosphere hissed through 2 cracks in the forward glass. Dead consoles sparked in rhythm with failing life support. High Commander Owen stood beside the ruined rail, armor split at the chest seam, ritual blade in his hand. Surratt sat against a bulkhead with his leg bound in improvised pressure tape, conscious and watching, with a face carved from exhaustion. Reyes stepped through drifting smoke, sidearm steady, voice carrying to every open recorder in her helmet and on the bridge. "High Commander Owen, your fleet is disarmed, your channels are sealed, and your war authority is void. Surrender now, and your people live." Owen did not answer at once. He looked past her to the fractured tactical glass where clan icons had become ceasefire marks, one after another, until there were no attack vectors left to command. His grip tightened on the blade, then loosened. Rage moved across his face, then something older and harder. Recognition paid too late. "You were meant to beg," he said, the words rough in the thinning air. Reyes held position. "We warned you." Owen's eyes tracked to Surratt, who gave the smallest possible nod, not permission, confirmation. At last, Owen lowered the blade. It slipped from his hand, struck the deck, and rang once. "I surrender to strength I did not believe could exist." Reyes advanced, signaled her team, and applied restraints herself, magnetic locks clamping over Owen's wrists and forearms. He did not resist. 2 Marines secured the blade in an evidence sleeve and tagged it to chain of custody record. Sato moved to Surratt with a medic and stabilized him for transfer. Reyes opened Fleet Command. "This is Reyes. Owen is in custody alive. Repeat, High Commander Owen in custody. Flagship bridge secured." The acknowledgement wave that returned carried no cheering, only clipped confirmations and updated tasking. There was still work everywhere. Okafor came on a private channel to Reyes while boarding teams processed prisoners in ordered lines across half a dozen crippled carriers. "Status of detainee." "Stable, restrained, fully recorded capture," Reyes said. "Request council custody package at once. No delays, no private handoff." "Approved," Okafor said. "He goes to tribunal breathing." On Owen's bridge, as transfer teams prepared the route to the custody shuttle, Reyes gave one final order to all units in theater. "Combat phase is over. Enforcement phase continues. Priorities are rescue, reactor safety, prisoner processing, and civilian corridor security. Any unauthorized retaliation will be treated as a direct violation of command." Around Vesta Gate, weapon fire thinned, then ceased, replaced by tow beams, salvage drones, medical transponders, and surrender beacons blinking in disciplined grids. The field that had flared white with collision became a harsha geometry of consequence. Reyes escorted Owen through the flagship breach and into the cutter lock. As the hatch sealed, and the shuttle turned toward the council custody ship waiting under neutral flag, Owen looked once through the small port at the vast drift of disabled carriers, captured hulls, and mixed species rescue craft threading between them under human command protocols. He said nothing else on the flight out. The custody shuttle docked against the council enforcement carrier with a hollow clang that carried through the lock tunnel like a gavel strike. Captain Imani Reyes stepped out first, helmet under one arm, and handed the restraint key to the gray-uniformed marshal waiting under neutral insignia. Owen followed, wrists bound, crest lowered, still silent. Behind him, 2 Marines carried the sealed evidence case containing his ritual blade. The case passed from human custody to council chain of evidence in full view of 3 witness drones, a Valeri legal observer, and a crystalline recorder node humming at tribunal frequency. Item A1. Blade recovered on flagship bridge, the marshal said for the record. Condition intact, transfer witnessed and uncontested. Reyes signed the slate, then added, include bridge audio through surrender, unredacted. Already mirrored to archive, the marshal replied. No private edits. Sarah came through a second lock on a stretcher, conscious, one leg immobilized in a human splint. He looked from Reyes to Owen and said, with a dryness that somehow survived anesthesia, "For what it is worth, Captain, your medics did not ask which clan crest to save." Reyes gave him a single nod and directed the triage team toward priority care. 3 hours later, Admiral Okafor stood in joint command facing a target lattice that made every officer in the room quiet. 2 Thesari moon foundries, still intact, had powered emergency launch cradles. If hit hard, they would never build war carriers again. If hit hard, they would also vent habitat bans where Thesari clans had embedded conscript juveniles as cultural hostages. Kovac brought up the verification packets from captured command corps, and the room watched names, ages, and labor assignments scroll in cold columns. Defense Liaison Miller spoke first. A decapitation strike is legal under wartime authority, clean from our side. Not clean from theirs, Srinivasan said. You do this. We bury children for an argument their elders started. No one corrected her use of the word children. The ethical threshold sat in the air like a pressure wall. Markovich arrived from council chambers with fresh authority tags and looked once at the lattice. What are my options if I demand neutral corridors into those habitats? Kovac answered. Politically difficult, operationally possible. We can lock launch rails with cyber interdiction and kinetic pinning, then open protected lanes for food and medical craft under council flags. Okafor folded his hands behind his back. And if they use the corridors to rearm, then we shut them again, Reyes said from the side station, still in field uniform. But we do not win this war by proving Owen right about us. The order went out in 17 lines, each read back twice. No orbital bombardment of Thesari population habitats. Precision interdiction against launch systems only. Mandatory surrender channels. Repatriation review for disarmed crews. Neutral aid corridor activation at once. By local dawn over the Foundry moons, human destroyers had cut power couplings, jammed launch cradles, and held fire on every habitat ring. Then the first relief ships arrived. Pax bulk carriers loaded with nutrient gel and water processors, Valeri medevac craft, and human hospital frigates with their weapons safed and their transponders bright enough to be seen from orbit. A Thesari dockmaster, hands shaking on open channel, demanded to know the price. Markovich answered herself from the council relay. The price is disarmament, inspection, and an end to raiding law. Your civilians are not bargaining chips. Send your injured and your juveniles first. We are recording every transfer. No one disappears. In the following inspection cycle, external contacts closed one by one, with outcomes written in signatures rather than promises. The Valari asylum request became permanent escorted corridors through Kipri and Halden, staffed by mixed crews. The merchants of Pax converted emergency credit to material deliveries and were repaid in treaty fuel guarantees ratified by unanimous vote. The Crystalline Consortium's telemetry archive, including the raw feeds of Owen's seizure command and the Bloodline SEAL collisions, became the evidentiary backbone of the war crimes docket. The 2 neutral blocs that had urged de-escalation language voted yes when censure reached the floor, then yes again when sanctions stripped the Sari war clans of extra-council port rights. 9 days after Vesta, the tribunal opened. The same chamber that had heard Owen's preventive correction order now held ranked marshals, allied observers, and public benches filled the standing limit. Owen stood in restraint field at the center dais, armored plates replaced by plain custody gray. The ritual blade case sat on a side pedestal, tagged Exhibit A1, seal unbroken since transfer. Surratt testified first from a mobility chair, voice steady. He confirmed command intent, the live seizure orders, the targeting of protected infrastructure, and his own warnings that the humans had prepared battle space long before first fire. When asked why he had not resigned command, he answered, "In the Thesari structure, resignation during engagement is decorative suicide. I chose to keep crews alive where I could." Then, Markovich took the speaking circle for final statement. Her voice remained calm, but each sentence carried the weight of names already entered into memorial records. For 2 centuries, humanity accepted inspection, arbitration, tariff oversight, and border mediation because we believed a lawful galaxy could outgrow predation. We were mocked for that patience and told that transparency was weakness. When threatened, we issued warning in open session. When attacked, we defended with proportional force and preserved civilian life where destruction was easier. We stand here with evidence unedited. Seizure orders transmitted live, civilian channels abused for intimidation, and surrender refused until capacity failed. Justice now is not revenge and not spectacle. It is a durable boundary. No species may claim security by owning another species' biology. No military doctrine may hide genocide intent behind procedural language. We ask this tribunal for sentence consistent with the record and with the future this council still has a chance to deserve. The judges returned in less than an hour. Owen was convicted on all major counts: aggressive war, attempted genocidal coercion, unlawful genomic seizure, and deliberate attacks on protected infrastructure. Sentence: life containment under council authority, no command contact, no bloodline communications, mandatory historical disclosure access for academic review. He listened without interruption. When asked if he wished to speak, he said only, "Strength without discipline is decay," and sat down. By the second week of ratification sessions, the Vesta Compact reached final vote. Clan raiding rights were abolished outright. Forced genomic seizure was codified as a crime against sapience with automatic collective enforcement triggers. Humanity was appointed permanent guarantor of biological sovereignty law, with oversight obligations shared by Valari Legal Corps, crystalline auditors, and rotating neutral inspectors to prevent monopoly or myth. Okafor accepted the mandate with visible reluctance and strict conditions. Every enforcement action must carry public evidence packets, civilian protection metrics, and post-action review by non-human panels. The council approved all 3 conditions without amendment. Thread by thread, the war's strange details were pulled into policy instead of rumor. Kovach's team declassified the pattern-mirroring ghost methods that had fractured the SARI command and then handed defensive countermeasures to every member species so no one could be manipulated the same way. Srinivasan chaired a new bioethics board that locked genomic response protocols behind existential thresholds and independent audit keys. She reminded every delegation that resilience medicine was not a license for endless war. Sato testified on adaptive boarding architecture and then trained mixed-species crews to disable rather than annihilate. Hale, promoted and still uncomfortable with ceremony, ran convoy security at Kepri until no merchant captain filed a fear report for 6 consecutive months. A year after Vesta, Kepri Junction looked like infrastructure again. The old cargo belt still carried scars where hidden rail shutters had opened, but now those housings wore bright hazard paint and public registry tags. Children from half a dozen species watched freighters pass through the observation gallery, pointing at escort formations with the uncomplicated fascination of people who expected arrivals, not alarms. On control, Reyes stood beside a Valari traffic chief and reviewed the day's convoy manifest. Medical supplies to Thesari habitat rings, agricultural enzymes to Orison spine, engineering teams outbound to rebuild Halden's damaged spindle. The final convoy of the shift entered on schedule under mixed command protocols. At its center moved 3 hospital ships carrying council white flags and human blue rescue bands. Flanking them were former Thesari raider escorts, hulls refitted, weapons capped for patrol compliance, transponders broadcasting their new role in clear text. Corridor Protection Unit. Their captains checked into Kepri Control with formal precision and accepted route corrections from a human lieutenant young enough to have been a cadet when Owen marched into the armory labs. Markovich watched from the gallery, hands resting on the rail where panic once spread like contagion. Okafor joined her in plain service uniform. No ceremonial sash. Below them, crews from species that had once avoided eye contact now traded docking priority jokes over shared channels while medics argued about protein rations and maintenance teams cursed at the same stubborn valve in 3 languages. "Do you trust it?" Okafor asked quietly. "Or do you trust only the systems?" Markovich considered the convoy turning through the junction throat, former predators guarding hospital hulls they once would have hunted. "I trust memory with enforcement," she said. Kindness remembered. Cruelty remembered. Both accounted for. The last hospital ship cleared the spindle and flashed acknowledgement lights toward control. The Thesari escorts matched the signal and took station ahead, steady and exact, guiding the convoy into open lanes under protocols written by the species their empire had called primitive. No active fronts remained. No contested claims stood unresolved. The peace held not because anyone forgot what happened at Vestigate, but because no one was permitted to forget it again.